Last Sunday's Easter service was mighty special. The sanctuary was packed and overflowing, as was the joy and energy in this place. It was remarkable. The Sunday after Easter is often called Low Sunday. Obviously, the attendance is a lot less than last week, but actually not as bad as I thought it would be. You're doing good. But today is also called Low Sunday because there is a major gap between the exuberant celebration of Easter and the rest of life. There is a theological gap between celebrating the resurrection and living a normal life. It's right there in the Bible, by the way. Jesus has been killed. His body is taken to the tomb. The women go to anoint the body, but something has happened. The body is not there. Some believe Jesus has been resurrected from the dead. Some believe they have even seen him. But the disciples are still hiding, living in fear, wondering what to do next. After all, even if somehow Jesus was raised from the dead, and even if that means I will be resurrected too, I would prefer to be resurrected after I live a long, natural life. I don't want to suffer the way Jesus suffered. And so they're still in that upper room full of grief, full of fear, full of doubt, full of guilt, wondering what the future holds. It's in this setting that the Gospel of John tells us that Jesus appears to them. He comes to them in the locked room and he says, "Peace be with you." He doesn't mention the denial or the betrayal. He does not get on them for not going out into the world. He says, "Peace be with you." And his appearance and his words seem to take away their grief and their guilt and their fear. But as you know, Thomas, one of the disciples, was not there. And so when he returns, the disciples, of course, tell him what happened. But again, as you know, he doesn't believe them. "I'll only believe if I see him and can touch him." A week later, Jesus appears to the disciples again. This time, Thomas is there. And Jesus says, "Thomas, come touch my hands. Come touch my wounds." And Thomas falls on his knees and says, "My Lord and my God." It's a wonderful story, but it's a story that has made Thomas the victim of bad press for 2,000 years. It's labeled him, or the story has been used to label him as Doubting Thomas, the one who was weak, the one who lacked faith. I remember as a child, the message was loud and clear, "Don't be like Thomas." But isn't Thomas the same Thomas who earlier in the gospel was willing to die for Jesus? Isn't he the same one when Jesus was wanting to go to the funeral of his friend Lazarus, but the rest of the disciples didn't want to go because it would be risky? Isn't that Thomas who is the only one who speaks up and says, "Let us go with him so that we can die with Jesus"? And why wasn't Thomas with the other disciples when Jesus first appeared anyway? Could he have been the only one who was willing to go outside of the hideout? Was he trying to get them food? Was he trying to find out what happened at Jesus' tomb? Perhaps he should be labeled as courageous Thomas. But he is Doubting Thomas. I don't know why he's singled out, because none of the other disciples believed that Jesus was alive until they saw him. But he's the one known as the doubter, and I don't have a problem with that. What I am concerned about is the negative implications that come with the title. In the mid-1990s, the Reverend Gerald Payne got 18,000 of his followers to take part in what seemed to be a foolproof investment, God-driven profits. Using the biblical story of the fish and the loaves, Payne told investors that he would buy an island, turn it into a religious refuge, and make them a fortune on gold, silver, and diamond mines in Africa and the Caribbean. In 2001, and some $580 million in investment losses later, Payne was sentenced to 27 years in prison for orchestrating a 6-year investment scheme. There should have been more doubting Thomases. Throughout history, masses of people have blindly followed dictators like Hitler and groups like the KKK, situations where people just went along. We could say that evil is the absence of doubt. Churches, be it large or small, are notorious for shunning people, for questioning, for rocking the boat. The questioners are seen as some kind of threat, as not getting it. I hope no one ever feels that way here. And if you ever do, please let me know. We should always be a congregation that affirms questions and respects people where they are on their faith journey. We are not to be people with all the answers. We are to be people who embrace the important questions and to keep those questions alive. Like who Jesus is and who God is. Who are we and whose are we? What is life about? When these questions are articulated and open for discussion, we have a better chance of coming to know what it is that we stand for, what it is that we believe, and what shape our faith takes. For the good news is that when we are given the freedom to question and to doubt, when we are able to be ourselves and to be honest and open with our feelings, as Thomas was, in a setting, if we can do this in a setting of love and acceptance, then in time our faith is strengthened. We have a resurrection experience. We experience new life. Faith and doubt are not opposites. Doubt is not the absence of faith. It is an element of faith. For faith to be mature, it must be examined and questioned. For faith to be mature, it must be examined and questioned. Tennyson said, "There lives more faith and honest doubt than in half the creeds." Theologian Frederick Buechner famously said, "Doubts are the ants in your pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving." The Apostle Thomas is strong. He's courageous. He speaks bluntly. He's willing to be vulnerable. He's daring enough to ask tough questions. He is not refusing to believe. He is refusing to settle for second-hand faith. And what happens? His questioning, his doubting leads him to an experience with the resurrected Christ. See, we experience the resurrection. We experience new life when we have the courage to question, when we have the courage to doubt, when we have the courage to be vulnerable, to be human. One of my favorite professors at Princeton Seminary was Donald Capps, who taught pastoral theology. I Googled him last night and just discovered that Dr. Capps died in an automobile accident last year. Had not realized that. In talking about the power of vulnerability and authenticity, Dr. Capps said, as we cross the boundary from avoiding shame to embracing it, accepting it as the most intimate part of ourselves, we create the inner climate in which God becomes revealed to us. Let me say that again. As we cross the boundary from avoiding shame to embracing it, accepting it as the most intimate part of ourselves, we create the inner climate in which God becomes revealed to us. We experience the resurrected Christ. In the 17th century, the artist Rembrandt grappled with how to depict Jesus in his sketches and in his paintings. When it came to portraying Christ, he radically veered away from the idealized and the classical European portrayals of Jesus that were so prevalent during the Renaissance. He decided to use naturalistic forms of Christ. At one point, he substituted his own anguished face for that of a suffering Jesus. And then later, he started using his neighbors from the Jewish section of Amsterdam, where he lived and worked, to be his models for Christ. Lloyd DeWitt, a curator at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, says that Rembrandt was repeatedly admonished by artists and by critics for associating with people of low station, which they saw as a negative influence on his work, and for insisting on naturalism at the expense of decorum. To depart from a beautiful Christ figure in the early 1630s was almost unthinkable. Rembrandt took that risk. Not even his students would follow his lead. What compelled Rembrandt to reject artistic and religious decorum and opt instead for a rough, flawed, starkly human Jesus? Maybe he needed a Jesus of flesh and bone, a Jesus who understood what it means to be human. And maybe he knew that the best way to experience the risen Christ was by embracing our humanity, our vulnerability, our authenticity. I must tell you that even though this Sunday is called Low Sunday, even though we don't have near as many here as we did last week, I really look forward to today, the Sunday after Easter. It's one of my favorite Sundays of the year, not only because I believe the message of Thomas is one we in the church so badly need to hear, but because the folks who come to church the Sunday after Easter remind me of the folks who stay with you after everyone has left the party to help you clean up and wash the dishes. They remind me of the folks who are there for you when you go through a divorce, or when you lose your job, or when you come to terms with an addiction. They're the folks who remind you that it's okay to be human, and that it's okay to question or to doubt. We all need folks like that in our lives. For the road to resurrection need not bypass our doubts, our struggles, our grief, our shame, our pain. These are not problems for our Christian journey. They, in fact, lead us to experiencing new life. Amen and amen. Thank you for being here on this low Sunday, which turned out to be a mighty high Sunday. If you've been here for a while, you know that the Sunday after Easter for me is also very special because it's the Sunday we have the Hester family reunion, which is out in Port Wentworth. And my family's always the last ones to get there because of church. And they always try to wait on us before they start eating. So we're kind of not liked because we're holding everybody up. So I'm not going to greet you today, so please forgive me after the service. I'm going to scoot out of here so I can get to Port Wentworth and to get the meal going there. But God bless you. Reverend Jan Durham will be there to greet you at the end of the service, and I'll be there for you next Sunday. Now go forth to question. Go forth to doubt, so you will grow in your faith. In the name of the one who gives us new life. Amen.